Welcome back to Black Market Leadership. I am Kevin Black, and this is part two of my discussion with the astute, the very clear, the controversial, and you could say even the fearless Dr. Michael Scheuer. In this second half of our interview, we discuss the impacts to the United States of not fighting the war on terror correctly, and I find this episode to be very heartfelt. I think you can see how serious that Dr. Scheuer really believes in his message and his analysis. And I take him for his word. And I tell you, I think in certain parts it's very moving. You're going to learn about what he's doing now, about his new book coming out. We'll even talk about Gore Vidal. Don't ask me how that gets involved, but it comes in. And with that, I just hope you enjoy this episode. This has probably been the most exciting episode I have ever done. I was very, very happy to get him, Dr. Scheuer, as a guest, and he was very, very affable, very polite, and he was very willing to participate. So again, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. So with that, here is part two of my discussion with Dr. Michael Scheuer.
This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
So two things. One is, I'm not a military strategist, but I've read military strategy, and I know Clausewitz wrote about if you're going to attack a civilized nation, you go to the capital. That's the hub of everything. But if you attack an uncivilized nation, you don't go to the capital. It's worthless. You attack the armies. You kill basically the chieftains. And 20 years after this, I spent some time in Iraq, and I'm really shocked. Like you, I am not impressed with our military leadership at all. I'm really not. And it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking to see the wasted opportunity. And one opportunity I wanted to ask you about, and again, I don't think the audience knows this, the big miss at Tora Bora. Could you talk about that for a second?
On the way in, when we were going in.
Yes.
Yes. I'm a long way away from it, but I was of the impression that the military thought that they could go into Tora Bora and to other mountainous or rugged areas of eastern Afghanistan after simply bombing the hell out of the area, thinking that the Afghans would run away or they would be killed. And when we came down in those parts of Afghanistan in helicopters, after these enormous bombardments with some of the biggest ordnance we had, we would have helicopters approaching and they'd get shot through their windshields, and there'd be rocket fired grenades and heavy machine gun fire. For some reason, they didn't seem to know that the Afghans had danced the same dance with the Soviets. The Soviets thought their air power would destroy any kind of will to fight or kill enough people that it wouldn't make a difference. And it took us forever. And I'm not sure we have at this point in time. I listened to some of the people that Fox hires as commentators, and most of them are field-grade officers with experience and obviously brave and resourceful men, but they all speak like small generals. They all think that somehow, because the Afghans weren't a nation state in the common sense, that they weren't really a worthy enemy. And here we are 20 years later, and they won again.
There's a writer, Tom Ricks. He wrote a book a long time ago, Fiasco, about the war. And I thoroughly enjoy the book. And it really, I get angry while reading it, because there's just some of the senior leader incompetence. And, I remember there were many times where he would call some of these generals overpaid battalion commanders. And there was one, this is actually going to lead to a question I'm going to ask you. But he told a story in the book about when Tommy Franks was being interviewed, or questioned, I should say, by some officers, and let's say interviewed by some officers. And they asked him, again, a Clausewitzian question, what is the nature of this war? And do you know his response was?
No.
That's a question that historians will answer later on.
Well, he's an ass. Tommy Franks, he was a gunner too long. I think it kind of rattled his brain. it was clear from the very beginning what they were doing was fighting an insurgency. And of all the wars, to save a nuclear war, an insurgency is the most brutal, bloody, indiscriminate sort of fight and killing. And throughout the whole war, whether it was senior officers that I worked with, people who were interviewed on military news channels, certainly politicians, no one ever called it a war, an insurgency. They insisted on calling it a war against terrorism. And it was a never-ending surprise to me. And finally, I just resigned in 2004. I said, this is going nowhere. And I think it was time. It was the right thing to do. But anyway, the idea that you can't call a war by its own name, that you can't commit to killing whoever needs to be killed to protect your own people. But worse than that, you establish rules of engagement that make your men and women they have to be shot at first before they can return fire, is an absolute foolishness,
Travesty.
a nonsense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's letting your guys get killed in the name of some idiot agreement you've signed with Europeans. You know, what would they say, well, we got to abide by these treaties or they won't join us. Now, what do you think the mighty Belgian Legion did for us as an ally in Afghanistan? They sat around and drank beer in their protected camps. That's what they did. The only people who fought in the Afghan coalition seriously were the Canadians, the British, the Australians, and us. And the Poles and the Romanians were brave and resourceful soldiers, but they fought under guidelines that to a great extent ensured that victory would never come.
It's really heartbreaking. It really, yeah.
You know what's the most heartbreaking thing? And I've said it a couple times, and I don't know if I'm going to say it again in public, but when they come home with these kids and you see they're in coffins, they're in wheelchairs, they have those, really amazing prosthetic devices. Some of them have it on both legs and an arm. And they serenade these kids and they buy them dinner and all of this stuff. And then they tell them you died for liberty, to protect the liberty of Americans. Our liberty since 1945, in all of the wars we've been in, save the Cold War, our liberties at home have been hashed by American politicians. There was never a threat from the Viet Cong, from the mighty Grenadians, the Panamanians, or Saddam, Al Qaeda. There was no threat at all to our liberties from anything they would do. Our liberties were made a mess of and constricted and finally now being removed because of American politicians.
This seems like it really falls into Bin Laden's, I guess, his ultimate strategy. Again, I feel like I'm a Clausewitz. I'm talking Clausewitz all day with you, but there's a great line in that the longer you fight a war without decisive victory, the stronger your enemy becomes. And the Islamic terrorists, again, maybe they're resurging now, but look what's happened to us at home. You got the Patriot Act. We're living in a war state. And
we've been at war in this country, a low-level insurgency for over a year, and no one has been punished or killed for it. They burn, they destroy property, they kill people, they rape people, and what do? We have commentators come out and tell us how peaceful this movement is as the buildings behind him are in flames. Americans in the 21st century are not equipped to deal with any problem that has a long lineage in history, as insurgencies do, as terrorism does, as religious conflict does, because they don't know history. They don't know anything about it. They think they're geniuses. They also think, especially in our leadership, that if a piece of paper doesn't have the word secret or classified or top secret on it, it's really not worth reading. I made a special effort to prepare a little journal, a monthly journal. My officers did. I just had the idea that we would send it forward, and we did it three or four times, and no one read it. And it was just to let people see what the enemy was saying, and compare it with a very short analytic paragraph that said, "Here's what they're saying. Here's what they're doing. Check the similarity." No interest in that at all.
I think there's so many factors to that. And one is, I have a question I hope it's not too abstract, but I really wonder, look, I know the 20th century, this country really changed. After World War I, you get the progressive era. It's really changed in its character. But I really wonder, the fact of our geography, that we're surrounded by two oceans. We have neighbors to north and south that we really, we don't face. I don't think we appreciate countries, in Asia and Europe who are surrounded by their enemies, who really take their security very, very seriously. I wonder if that could be a factor in our calculus.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. And I'm just finishing, after almost 10 years, a book on American foreign policy and what we have lost as a nation in terms of liberties, in terms of economic opportunity, in terms of unity, by not following the founders' idea that we should be a neutral and non-interventionist country. One thing in terms of what you said, the founders thought that because we were sitting here in North America and there were two oceans on either side, and no one was ever going to conquer this country by sending troops here, it might be conquered from inside out, but not from anywhere else. And they thought it was best for us just to mind our own business. And there is no one more prototypically isolationist than any American politician in either party. Not in the sense that they don't look at the world and they don't travel the world, but they know nothing about the world. They know nothing about the history of, for example, one of the most astounding things is once Obama and the EU overthrew the government in the Ukraine, and were establishing a government that wanted to get into NATO and into the EU, that in that kind of environment, it was clear what was going on in Ukraine, that anyone on earth could be surprised that Putin used the army and the military to take the Crimea back. Now, there was a big uproar about that, as if people couldn't understand that. And if you knew anything about Russian history, you would know that the military never wanted to give up Crimea when Khrushchev did. And certainly Putin, being an adult, could not be the guy in charge and who let Ukraine go into NATO, into the EU, and taking the Black Fleet's bases away with it. For them to act surprised and cry crocodile tears because of what Putin did, any smart nationalist, concerned, knowledgeable about his country's history, and knowledgeable about what it took to secure the country would have done the same thing, except an American, I guess.
Russia, I've always been fascinated with Russia, and you're absolutely right. One thing Americans really, really don't understand, when I teach American military history, it brings a new light to our contribution, because, the Allies really were allies. It was a team effort. And people don't realize, during World War II, 15% of the Russian population was killed. 15%. Yeah. And
we never make a mention of their contribution. If we didn't have the Russians fighting from the east, we would have, I think the German army would have driven us back into the sea.
Oh, yes. No less than three out of four German soldiers of the Wehrmacht had fallen on the Eastern Front. It was a bloodbath. The Red Army was just taking enormous casualties. And by the way, of that 15%, 80% of that were civilians being murdered. So, I'm not carrying water for Russia, but, I can probably understand that they may be a little insecure or a little paranoid about their borders.
Well, I wish we were. You know, we're being invaded from the south, and it's all of this current problem, whether it's economic or race or borders. It's all being inflicted on the American people by the Democrats, you know, and a lot of Republicans. And I tend to think it was Lincoln, but I'm not sure. But he went in, when he was a young man, went into the idea that we can't be conquered from the outside. He said no soldier of Napoleon could ever set a foot on the Rocky Mountains. But if we can be defeated, if we become disunited and lose the feeling of common citizenship and common responsibility. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment.
You know, all you gotta do is look back in history and you'll find Greek and Roman philosophers talking about, you know, I'm not scared of my enemies. I'm scared of inner turmoil, the friction and fragmentation inside our country, inside our own team, as opposed to the enemy. So that's not, these are timeless principles. And you're right. You're right. So many Americans don't know their history. And to me, history, I was a history major, and I have found, maybe you can help me with this. I don't know what you call this, but I think history is one of the most critical, important subjects a professional could have. And yet it is the most dangerous to get professionally in terms of professional education.
Well, I can't agree more than that with you more on that particular issue. I was very fortunate, for example, to go to the agency because at the time, Mr. Reagan and the director, Bill Casey, had expanded the list of academic credentials that they would accept for people to come there. And formerly, history was not included. But they put in history and historians of international affairs. And so I managed to hook on, and otherwise I would never got in there. But in the history they teach now is clearly less than useful to the citizens' role in the society. Just look at the Civil War. The war had virtually nothing to do with slavery until the end, when the Congress was able to pass amendments that forbid slavery, all to the good. But people who say that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves, now that's kind of common wisdom now, and it's completely wrong. Lincoln could not have put a corps of infantry into the field if he was calling on people to end slavery. It just didn't occur to him, and it was unconstitutional. So how do you undistort that? You know, Americans, perhaps as much as anybody on earth, want to feel good about themselves. And so, you mean we fought a war that killed 600,000 people and it wasn't to free the slaves? No, it wasn't. Also, when we were able to manipulate oil prices in the Middle East in the 80s and in the 90s, Bin Laden called attention to those and saying, listen, the Arab people, the Saudi people, the Arab people should have more money. Our prices are being kept low by the Americans and the British, which was quite true. But you say that and you're automatically kind of an anti-American, an America hater or some other description. But it's a very odd world, sir.
No, it is. And we're running close to the end here because I promised you no longer than an hour, and I'm going to keep my word. But last night, I just want you to know, for the past 2 or 3 days, I have been running all these questions through my head to talk to you about, to ask you. And last night I try to relax. And how do I relax? I watch a documentary. I found on YouTube. It was about Gore Vidal. Now, I don't philosophically agree with Gore Vidal, though I'm not really familiar. I wasn't really familiar with his works, but I watched this documentary called United States of Amnesia. And
Gore Vidal was one of the great American non-interventionists. With Lindbergh and other heroic figures in our history who have tried to keep us out of other people's business.
And that's what I say. I found it fascinating. I was like, wow, that's true. That really makes sense. I think in fundamentals, though, I wouldn't agree with them. But I think in terms of interventionists and even, the sly characters of politicians, or sinister, I should say, I was like, wow, I'm glad I got to watch this now.
He was a remarkable guy, and I have to say, his biography of Lincoln, it's a novel, but it's a tremendously good portrait of Lincoln and his political powers and his deviousness, but also his clear view of what was going on. It's a wonderful book.
Wow. I'm writing this down.
Yeah, it's just called Lincoln.
Okay.
I think you'll enjoy it very much, sir.
So, before we cut this short, or end this, Dr. Scheuer, Mike, Dr. Mike,
please.
Mike, one of my listeners, a friend of mine, West Point, Mike from West Point, has a question for you, and I told him I'll try to work it in. It's an easy question, but this is what it is, and I hope you can answer it. Do you have any recommended readings about the war in Iraq that you consider fair and objective?
Of our war, I'm not aware of any. I could be just unaware, but everybody it seems to me to have had an axe to grind. There are several good books about Iraq and the British in World War I, and Churchill's role there. And it is a story that, if it's read, it will remind people very much of what we're facing or what we faced in Iraq going in, and our unwillingness to confront reality. And I would look to that. I think both in Iraq and Afghanistan, the historic examples of trying to occupy either one of those countries is so overwhelmingly negative in the sense of any chance for someone like us, a non-Muslim, to go about doing that they would be convincing. But I read some of the work of Ricks and who was that? The court historian for the Washington Post. He's the Watergate guy. Bob.
Woodward.
Woodward. His book. There's a bunch of books, but a lot of those people, in the sense of Woodward, I know for a fact that the agency would send senior officers once they got back from Afghanistan or Iraq to brief Woodward. Stuff they wouldn't release to the American people, of course, but because they wanted to give a good slant to the idiot politicians saying that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, they would send agency officers who were willing to kind of not tell the whole truth about what they saw and what they experienced to talk to Woodward. So I'm a little, not only don't we know our history, but our historians don't really know how to be historians. It is, they start out with what they're going to find at the end of it. And it is a recipe for disaster. It's like looking at the Civil War from 1865 backwards. You assume that a Union victory was inevitable. But twice in 1864, we came close once to losing Washington and once to losing part of the Army of the Potomac. So it's, I guess I'm a special pleader for the importance of history. But we have a lot of history. There's a lot of history in the world we could learn more about and take seriously. But we're much too busy being impressed by what we do and how pure we are in our motives. I tend to think that one of the big problems is the type of Christianity we've devolved to. We no longer teach kids and people that man is fallen, and that while capable of great and good things, is also capable at any time of depravity. And we don't take into consideration enough that you have to have policies that take that into consideration, if you will.
Right.
Certainly the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan brought out the most depraved nature of a lot of people in this country in terms of stealing money from the budgets that were allotted for those wars, in terms of sending young men and women into combat without permission to shoot unless they're shot at, in terms of constantly lying to the American people We're fighting terrorists. No, we're not. We're fighting insurgents. And just lying. How many times did we hear Obama, and did we hear Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all of these other people say, well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're doing better. We're training the Afghan military. You could train the Afghan military for the next 40 years. And once we were gone, they just go back to their tribes being well trained and armed and fight the other tribes. It's just, you sooner or later, you walk smack into reality. And we have a lot of people who, even when they've been bruised and bloodied by reality, won't admit it.
To quote you, I think you said democracy is one of the least exportable assets that we have, and we don't know how to do it. So
we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to do it at home. The founders were tremendously negative in terms of democracy. They wanted no part of it. They thought it inevitably led to chaos and then to tyranny. And we're in the midst of something that's going along that particular trail at the moment.
That's the real genius of the founders, because they wanted neither the rule of the many over the one, or the one, the monarchy over the many. They found that beautiful constitutional republic.
Well, when the book I mentioned that I'm writing at the moment, the first thing I did to get ready to write it was to go back and read Thucydides and to Tacitus and the Romans and the Greek historians. And I tell you, there's nothing in those books that's not pertinent to today in terms of what to expect from human nature and the importance of knowing what came before in planning how you want to go ahead. And that reason is a wonderful thing, but it's no guide to the future. It's only a means of rationalizing whatever you want to do. And that if you don't depend on experience or history, as Jefferson used the words interchangeably, if you don't take heed of experience, past events, then you're going to make the same mistakes unnecessarily. And we seem to specialize in that, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Scheuer, this has just been it's been a fantastic interview. And by the way, you bringing up the book that you're writing, I was going to ask you that, because I remember 6 or 7 years ago, you on your radio show talking about writing this book. I was going to ask you the progress. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's just finished. I'm just finishing now. It took me a long time to do it. And I had a little, I speak in the book a lot about America was founded not as a home for immigrants, but as a white Protestant country that fought a war not exclusively to separate, and not even in the first instance to separate from Britain, but to recover what the colonists called English liberties, which had been constricted by the king and by his parliament in the United States, resulting in more taxes, interference in local government, military occupation eventually, and then finally war. And the way the founders are painted now, it is like they're monsters. And so people aren't going to go and read all of the works of George Washington, all of his written work, which is enormous, if they think he's a slave master, old white man who has nothing to say to us. So it's an endless problem. I don't know how to fix it. I think when we look at why we are where we are, I would put a lot of responsibility on the educational system and on the enfeeblement of Christianity.
Well, I would totally agree. I agree with you. The educational system. I think some of the greatest villains, and I'll say some of the greatest villains, I think, are in the liberal arts departments. I pride myself in being able to. I think I teach an objective, interesting. Again, I try to be fair and I try to be objective. In fact, this is why I've learned from watching you. It doesn't serve you well to rationalize, to be non-objective. If you can call the cards as you see them, and you speak the truth, and you really bring an honest look to who we are, what we're great at, what we should not be doing, things which don't serve us. I think if you could bring that to light, people are interested out there. It's just the fact is there are hardly any voices, and I think you're one of the very few voices out there who does this. So I'm extraordinarily excited to read your next book.
Well, I hope you enjoy it, sir. And if you'd like me to come talk to you about it, or talk again on the telephone, I'd be happy to do it. We'll see. I hope to have it out next year. It's a long book. I don't know how much of it will make it through the editorial process, but I found it a fabulously interesting endeavor. I wish I could have done it sooner, but for any number of reasons, couldn't. Including the changing nature of what's acceptable to print and say in the United States.
Yeah. Well, speaking of print, for the audience here, again, Dr. Scheuer's books, he's got 4 great books. I highly recommend Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terror. Your Marching Toward Hell book, I love, but Osama Bin Laden biography, I just found it absolutely fascinating to understand, to not shy away, but to read about your enemy, to understand who they are, why they're doing the things they are. And that kind of basis, that kind of information helps you, helps your decision-making in life. So highly recommend you go to Amazon. You can buy them there. We can also find you on iTunes. Is that correct? The 2 mics?
The 2 mics, and we're on Rumble. And you can look up the 2 mics on Google. It's I'm not quite sure how the whole system works, but everybody's been surprised that we have so many subscribers. So I guess that's good. There's no money involved. We're just kind of pleasing ourselves. 2 old men ranting.
I love it. It's great marketing. You're building an audience for your next book already. This is fantastic.
Well, I'll leave you with one thing about not reading what the enemy's saying. No one read Mein Kampf. And if you read it today, the game plan is there. The order of attack is there. The motivation is there. And, you have to pay attention to what the enemy says. And, that's kind of square one.
Absolutely. If they say something, trust them, listen to them, and take them at their word. So
until they disprove it, right? You don't take it like a Pollyanna, but take it, look at it. Does it make sense in their culture? Does it make sense in their history? Does it make sense in their economy? And do they do the things they said they were going to do? And if the answer to those things are yes or mostly, then you got a problem on your hands.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Michael Scheuer, it has been a pleasure, sir. A pleasure. And again, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Market Leadership. It's been my pleasure, sir. I don't get many invitations anymore, so I'm always eager to spout out my vast guessing in terms of history. But we'll see how it goes. I hope you do well with it. Well, I hope this will bring some more light on you and you get more guests. I'll do my best to support you. So again, thank you so much, sir. And please apologize to your friend. I just have not kept up. I read 20 or 30 books on Iraq, and I was very dissatisfied with most of them, and I just don't have one I would point to. Oh, no, that's great. He's just going to be so happy I mentioned Mike from West Point. There you go. Well, yep, you should, and tell him to have a look at the British experience in Iraq during the First World War era. I think that's a solid analytic way to look at why what happened to us in Iraq happened to us. Okay, we'll do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, again, go to Amazon, check out Michael Scheuer's books and his podcast, 2 Mics. All right, thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile